morning and welcome to Rising. We've got another great show for you today. An exciting one with lots of interesting topics to discuss. We'll be joined actually in studio. A special guest, Representative Ritchie Torres, is stopping by to talk about what's happening on Capitol Hill today, this week, and so we're looking forward to that.
Yeah, but first we got to start with what's on your radar. I think I might know, but tell us what's on your radar.
You're sensing a theme here. Yes, indeed. CNN's Jake Tapper is making the media rounds, promoting his new book, Original Sin, his book with Alex Thompson, which explains how President Joe Biden's handlers, advisors, and campaign staff, as well as Democratic Party leads and portions of the media, shielded Biden from scrutiny during his presidency. Now, his obvious, appalling cognitive decline was hidden from the press by Chuck Schumer and by Hakeem Jeffries and Nancy Pelosi and Karine Jean-Pierre and Jen Psaki and his cabinet and Kamala Harris and many, many other people. And now the media is admitting it, finally. But frankly, it's not good enough. Let me be clear. I am glad that some media figures are admitting that they were misled by Biden and that they should have pressed him and his team more aggressively for answers about his diminished cognitive state. Admitting wrongdoing is better than not admitting wrongdoing. But the issue is that Biden's health-related collapse was not missed by everyone in the media. It was just missed by the mainstream media. Conservative and independent media, they noticed it and they spoke up about it. And we didn't have nearly the same access to the White House, to Biden, that Jake Tapper did. Here was Megyn Kelly pressing Tapper on this point on her show yesterday. Let's watch.
He promised you that he would be transparent about his health records, and then he wasn't. And when you sat with him again, including 1 month after the Jackie Walorski thing, you didn't ask him about it. You didn't follow up on the fact that he was falling up the stairs, that he was losing his train of thought regularly, that he was slurring, that he was incomprehensible, that he was getting lost on the White House lawn. You sat right across from him and you asked none of that, notwithstanding the fact that he had promised you he would be fully transparent about his health issues.
Tapper did say that he called Lara Trump to apologize to her for that infamous interview in which he criticized her for noticing Biden's cognitive decline. Remember that? Let's take a stroll down memory lane.
Is very clearly a cognitive decline. Okay. That's what I'm referring to. It makes me uncomfortable.
You are
to watch somebody on stage
That's so amazing. It's so amazing to me that
try and figure out an answer.
A cognitive decline.
Well, when you're trying to tell me that what I was suggesting was
I think that you were mocking his stutter. Yeah, I think you were mocking his stutter, and I think you have absolutely no standing to diagnose somebody's cognitive decline. I would think that somebody in the Trump family would be more sensitive to people who do not have medical licenses.
Ooh, that interview has not aged well. Tapper was right to apologize for it. He's also right to acknowledge that he's embarrassed that he did not pursue the story more aggressively. But look, this story is not over. Biden just announced that he has cancer. And if you believe what he's saying, that he didn't know until last Friday. This assertion strains credulity for a number of reasons. Look, it's inconceivable to me that the President of the United States, having access to better health care than just about anyone else in the country, would not have had the kind of testing that would have revealed such a condition. And if there was some suspicion of illness that was not followed up upon because it would be inconvenient to the campaign, well, that's a story too. Let's have some mainstream journalists get after it. Meanwhile, the Democratic Party is trying desperately to pivot to any other topic. Republicans are coming to take away your health benefits, shouts Hakeem Jeffries. So says he. Honestly, do you believe him? Does anyone? The entire leadership of the party should resign in disgrace. They're complicit in this cover-up, and they are not trustworthy, which is what we are continuing to discuss here today. The Megyn Kelly interview with Jake Tapper was, I think, very interesting. And, I want to be careful here in my criticism because I'm glad Tapper wrote this book with Alex Thompson. I'm glad they're doing these media appearances. Thompson was there as well on the Megyn Kelly show, and they stood up to the heat, as it were, and they admitted some wrongdoing in terms of how they handled this story. So that's all good. It's better for people to admit when they got it wrong than to steadfastly maintain they did nothing wrong. So I appreciate that. What did you make of the interview? Alex Thompson,
I'll give him a pass because he's been covering Biden's health throughout the presidency and the re-election announcement. Now, Jake Tapper. So Naomi Biden, which is Joe Biden's granddaughter, she said something that I thought was really profound yesterday. She said the ones who rarely enter the arena but profit from the spectacle of those that do. And that's what she was referring to Jake Tapper. And so I'm going to bear with me for a second, but if you guys know, Brene Brown has a TED Talk about basically entering the arena and the people that are spectators that always have all the criticisms. Biden gave 50 years of his life to entering the political arena and trying to make change. Jake Tapper is a journalist that was covering Biden, and he now is using a very opportunistic route, which has minimal, damage for him. It's making it low risk, high reward move for him to do at this time when Biden is not running, to be a part of this type of book. When we just saw some of those interviews where he was also, like everyone else, misled and perhaps intentionally doing it, whatever he wants to say. Both times it was opportunistic. To make Laura Trump an embarrassment on his show was opportunistic, and now to write this book. So to me, I think it's very important that in this capitalist world, we understand what's going on. He's trying to make money, and that's very intentional and obvious, but I don't know that it's appropriate to do it on the back of Joe Biden. Like, was Joe Biden actually having this grand scheme to try to scam everybody, or was Joe Biden an older man who actually just believed that after 50 years of resilience and overcoming major health and serious life obstacles, that he could go again? And I think that that's a question we all have to ask ourselves before we try to make out some big scheme that was planned to try to, run the presidency and plan that he was going to pass the torch to Kamala. I don't think all that was there. And I think we're making a mountain out of a molehill. And it's okay to provide space around somebody struggling with the health issue and understand that sometimes when people get older, they may not be acknowledging that change is so obvious for family and friends and loved ones and staff and colleagues to see.
But don't you think maybe he never came straight out and said it, that I'm going to be a one-term president, but he did stress that he would be a transitional figure to new leadership? I think there was an expectation that he was maybe only going to serve one term. So then it does get a little bit into territory. Well, it was his decision to run again when he shouldn't have. Now, maybe you can put a lot more blame on the people around him, his family members, his senior advisors, giving him bad advice. We're also, some of the reporting in the Tapper book is that he was, reliant on Donlin, this one pollster who was characterizing things in a very rosy way for Biden, even up until the end, where Biden was shocked to hear from other pollsters who represented what most polls showed him, like, starting to be way outside the bounds of even conceivably being able to win re-election. And he was surprised by that because he was using someone who was presenting the numbers to him in the most favorable possible light. That a little bit goes to, the accountability. I also, I was thinking more and talking yesterday with Amber Duke, who hosts the show often on Fridays, about, the timeline of the cancer diagnosis. And the more I think about it, the more I find it really hard to believe that this was not known to Biden and his inner circle months and months ago. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe their line is that was really missed until last week. I find that so. This person, maybe the average citizen can miss something. These things get missed, but this is someone with much better health care than anybody else, for good reason. He's an important figure. And I just find it so inconceivable. What I find possible is they maybe had some indication because of his health condition. I mean, that could have been what happened too, that he's experiencing some kind of symptoms where they should have checked to see if it was this, and they decide, no, we don't want to know, because if we know, then we got to tell everybody, and then it'll be a huge campaign issue. And so they allow him to linger in some kind of pain, and at that age, pain or discomfort for these reasons, that can actually drive you. That can propel a mental decline very, very, very much can be the case. We've all had senior citizen relatives who, enter the hospital for a fall or something.
Right.
And then they turn that corner mentally because of that experience. So with all due respect and wanting him to recover fully, I have a lot more questions about the timing of the cancer diagnosis.
I think maybe it was a miscalculation for me instead of a cover-up. But I guess we'll keep trying to find out and get to the bottom of it.
Next up, President Trump thinks fellow Republican Thomas Massie, one of my favorites, should be voted out of office. Stay tuned. President Trump took some serious shots at Congressman Thomas Massie yesterday.
Massie has been critical of the Republicans' big, beautiful bill that they're trying to pass in Congress.
Now, a reporter asked Trump about his thoughts on Massie's criticism.
Do you think that Thomas Massie is correct in saying that this is adding Biden?
No, I don't think Thomas Massie understands government. I think he's a grandstander, frankly. He'll probably vote. We don't even talk to him much. I think he should be voted out of office. And I just don't think he understands government. If you ask him a couple of questions, he never gives you an answer. He just says, I'm a no. He thinks he's going to get publicity, and you have that.
The comment, however, didn't seem to faze Massie. Let's listen.
He said my hair is better than Rand Paul's.
But what did you make of him calling you a grandstander in there?
It's fine. It's fine.
What about his...
All I heard was my hair is
No, he said this twice.
Massie says the big, beautiful bill would add $20 trillion of federal debt over 10 years and would increase the price of our current debt. The congressman also took to X to ask for campaign contributions and said Trump threatened him.
Trump reportedly told House Republicans not to F with Medicare. He also appears fed up at the House Republicans trying to increase SALT deductions, which is a federal deduction for state and local taxes. Republicans can only afford to lose 3 votes in the House to pass this entire bill.
So what is happening here is that Thomas Massie, who's a very principled, limited government individual, actually wants to cut government spending, and no one else does. And that's the whole story. That's not surprising. Thomas Massie has wanted to cut government spending for as long as he's been in Congress. He's one of like 2 or 3 people who actually mean it. When they say we're going to cut government spending, then they actually vote to do just that. Everyone else, and I'm calling out every other Republican, virtually every other, it's like him, Rand Paul, and a couple others who actually want it, maybe like Chip Roy, who actually want to do it. Everyone else falls in line when the leader says, now's not the time to cut the spending. We'll save the hard work for later. We'll get to it, though. We'll do it later, for sure. We're going to totally do it later. And then they kick the can down the road and they never get to it. So, you know, I agree with Massie, but our voters, we're not running for anything. Our viewers already know that I'm of his inclinations.
Well, he's a traditional fiscal conservative, which is appropriate to stick to what you have been running and campaigning and standing on for years, despite who's in office, right? Your job is to represent the constituents in the districts that you go home and report to. These people voted you in office. They weren't ordained and knighted into positions. And so the fact that Trump doesn't have the opportunity to run again, there was this level of fear that no longer exists because, like Massie, people understand that you can't really do much to me after this next 3 years, but the voters can. They can get me out of office. And I think that's where your priority should always lie. I think with things like the fiscal conservatism and then also the Medicaid portion, this big, beautiful bill is completely unrealistic, throwing the whole kitchen sink inside of one bill in order to protect these tax cuts. And I know that Trump is more worried about his legacy than actual Americans, because if he doesn't pass these tax cuts, what happens? The approval rating continues to go down, the economy continues to be in disarray, and people now not only look at Trump because of these tariffs and how they're actually going to be affecting them all summer, but then also the wealthy people and people that will benefit from these tax cuts are also looking at Trump like, wait, aren't you the business government leader? Aren't you the savvy businessman that was going to get us out of this economy that Biden, quote unquote, had us in or put us in? And so I think this all relies on his legacy, and it's a litmus test for how well the Republican Party will stick together in lockstep and finally maybe step away from that narrative and just do things that are appropriate for the people they represent.
Yeah, Massie is unfazed because he's gotten lots of criticism for his various stances, which, again, he says, and I agree with him because I happen to agree with most things he thinks, are perfectly consistent. He got criticized by AIPAC last time around, the pro-Israel lobbying group, for he supports, obviously, Israel's right to fight against terrorism, but he doesn't want to necessarily give money to Israel or any other foreign government. He thinks American tax dollars should be spent at home. So he got, AIPAC spent some money against him. Trump attacked him, and he still won. He won with 75% of the vote.
Yeah, but this is not The Apprentice. Trump can't just threaten and say you're fired to everyone that disagrees. He's
popular in his district.
Right.
Because I think his voters know, Massie's voters know, that he's not like some never Trump, Adam Kinzinger or whatever type person who's just against everything Trump does. Rand Paul says the same thing. We interviewed Rand Paul on the show, And I said, Senator, Trump, they're saying you're a Trump hater. And he's like, I don't hate Trump at all. I play golf with Trump. I like Trump. I feel affection for the president. I just disagree with him on some things. Failing to control the deficit spending, the tariffs, the economic policy, those are those things. And I would say to Trump, part of if you're thinking about your legacy,
which he
Republicans have been voted into power time and time again because the voters care about the budget deficit. So you have to do both spending cuts I would say on the entitlement side for sure. I agree with them doing that. I know it's not politically popular, and we're going to have on Representative Torres today to discuss that. But you also have to cut defense spending and on all sorts of other things. You have to cut it all because we are trillions in debt. And after this bill, if it passes, if it becomes law, we're going to be even more in debt. And it's very frustrating to me that more Republicans don't acknowledge that. Well, they'll acknowledge it and say, well, that's what we have to do now, and then we'll do a better job in the future. But right now, you control every branch of government. The Republican Party has as much power right now as basically it's ever had in my lifetime, barring the immediate, right after 2004 when Bush was at the height of his power. Other than that, the Republican Party has as much power as it's ever had in my lifetime. They should use this moment to actually pass legislation that reflects conservative libertarian principles. If they don't do it, they're never going to do it.
But if they cut certain things like Medicare, which I know we're going to talk about later, that directly is an issue for Republican voters. There are several Republicans that represent districts where there's a high rate of people who use these government programs. And so these are the same people that voted for President Trump. So he's going to be, you can either, cut your nose to spite your face, like you're going to be in it for the long haul with these people. And so either you have a presidency with a Democratic-controlled Congress, if you cut Medicaid, and if you mess with any government programs just because you're saying that people are abusing them and the abuse is not even rampant, or you can figure out a happy medium like Congress is supposed to do to figure out how to represent all Americans and not just what you think is Republican Americans that want a tax cut. So, there's a lot to discuss here. Up next, Bernie Sanders presses CBS not to give in to Trump's attacks on a free press. Senator Bernie Sanders is sounding the alarm after some shocking news from CBS this week. In a post on Blue Sky, Senator Sanders wrote, quote, Bill Owens, the producer of CBS 60 Minutes, resigned in protest. Wendy McMahon, the head of CBS News, has now resigned. I say to Sherry Redstone, enough is enough. Do not capitulate to Trump's attacks on a free press. Do not settle Trump's bogus lawsuit against 60 Minutes.
As the senator alluded to there, this is all fallout from the lawsuit brought by the Trump administration over a 60-minute segment that the president claims is deceptively edited. Critics say the outcome of that suit threatens the approval of parent company Paramount's merger with Skydance Studios, which is why Paramount executives reportedly favor a settlement.
But the head of CBS News, Wendy McMahon, didn't stick around to be a part of that potential settlement, saying in a statement to her colleagues that she wouldn't apologize for the 60-minute segment.
Wendy McMahon had said to colleagues for a number of months that she would not apologize as a part of any settlement. You'll recall that ABC did apologize to Trump when they settled a lawsuit Trump had filed back in December. McMahon and Owens said they would not apologize. McMahon said, "That's a red line I will not cross."
According to CNN's Brian Selter, the exodus of Bill Owens and Wendy McMahon have employees feeling like a purge is happening at CBS.
Some on the right are arguing that may not be a bad thing and that this isn't an attempt to dismantle the fourth estate, but something much more sinister. Take a listen.
Journalism is under attack. No, journalism is not under attack. Propaganda is under attack, right? Letting these people openly lie on their airways, okay, about the president. Yeah, that is under attack, okay? These mainstream liberal media outlets are, in fact, engaging in anti-Trump propaganda. They're purposely distorting their news coverage in order to smear President Trump, okay?
So I agree that there's a lot of anti-Trump propaganda in the media. I have criticized to no end the editing of the 60 Minutes interview, which, to my mind, stripped Kamala Harris's terrible answer on what, if anything, they were doing.
Terrible breath that she took. Too long of a pause.
She paused a long time.
So that completely changed her response, in your opinion?
I think it worsened the response and the editing softened it. Now, do I think it's something you should sue over? No, and I don't agree with Donald Trump's tactic of actually suing media companies. I don't agree, frankly, with anyone. Now, he's entitled to do it, but I would leave them alone. Why does Bernie Sanders care about this, though? What is his...
Well, this is setting a dangerous precedent that I think we have to stop
Bernie
right
Sanders
now.
Gets to decide who sues
No,
people?
Bernie Sanders should be part of this conversation because Trump is not a dictator. And so I think when we're looking at what's happening, most recently this week, just because Qatar gave him a jet and ABC decided to, like journalists do, question whether it was a gift or not, he said, "We talked about this. I'll threaten to sue you again." I'm paraphrasing. But he was threatening the company again for suing them about asking in the press room if that was a gift. It literally looks like a gift to Republican colleagues. So I think that's a real question, and you cannot berate people into existence. You know, free press doesn't mean that people are going to cooperate and do what you like. Free press means that people are going to actually report on the information in the news.
So you think that elected officials should not pester media companies or private individuals about their activities?
Elected officials should, no, they should. Pester is different than actually trying to sue them because you want to silence them. I don't think that media companies should be silenced.
Well, I have news for you. Democrats are constantly trying to silence media companies. The whole media applauded, by the way, the lawsuit against Fox News for the Dominion lawsuit, which was not aimed at the people who made false statements on Fox, which were invited guests who were interviewed by the hosts very critically in some cases, but a lawsuit against Fox itself. I don't remember that being held up as an attack on the Fourth Estate, even though it was.
Good point, but that didn't come from a president of our United States. And so I think when Trump is initiating these attacks, then we're setting a precedent that, well, if he says it for the next 3 years, we must cooperate, even though, like you said, cutting out a pause to me doesn't equal a lie. And so I don't think there's anything worth suing over.
I've covered Democrats sending threatening letters to the CEOs of major tech platforms and video streaming services, Comcast, Verizon, etc., because they carry Newsmax or OAN or the conservative news channels saying this is misinformation and we're going to investigate you and go after you for having it. Now, I'm against all of this. So I think Trump should leave him alone. I think Democrats should leave him alone. I think if you don't like what's being said on a news channel or news program or media entity, criticize the F out of it if you want, but don't resort to legal tactics or lawsuits. That's fine. That will be my rule. But the Republicans' view is this was we're going to do whatever the Democrats were doing.
This just tries to validate Trump's victim narrative, and this is not about fairness at all. This is about control. This is about everybody, the same thing that the big, beautiful bill is about. Everybody listen to what I want to do. I want to get these tax breaks done. Listen to me. don't do this, don't do that. But people have autonomy and the opinions, and journalists have the authority and the right to do their jobs fully and completely, even if that means that you don't look great all the time. Because some things that he does actually work, and a lot of things don't. And so we're allowed to report on those things that don't work without you trying to sue people.
I agree, but I really do think if you look at the edited response and the non-edited response, I think there was a little bit of editorial.
That breath changed everything for Kamala.
Well, nothing could have saved Kamala, but
Congressman Ritchie Torres says Republicans are hurting
the lives of Americans. He'll join us next. Stay tuned.
Congressman Ritchie Torres says Republicans are robbing tens of millions of Americans of their fighting chance at a decent life. He's referring to the GOP's plan to gut Medicaid. At least $880 billion is reportedly on the chopping block, potentially leaving the 71 million Americans enrolled without benefits. Cuts to the social safety net program are personal for Torres. He represents New York's 15th district, which includes South Bronx. 67% of its residents are on Medicaid. So according to the census, Medicaid provides medical care for low-income populations and people with disabilities. Large cuts to the program stand to impact his constituents the most.
Congressman Ritchie Torres joins us now to discuss. Welcome to Rising. Thanks so much for being here, Congressman.
An honor to be here.
So let's get right into it. Republicans say their view is, well, look, we're just going to change the eligibility requirements so that if you're an able-bodied young person, you have to be working or seeking work in order to get these benefits. How would you respond to that?
Well, first, Republicans are effectively defunding health care and food in the tune of over $1 trillion in order to pay for tax cuts for the top 1%, which to me is, A, fiscally irresponsible at a time when interest on the debt has surpassed $1 trillion a year. We're spending more on debt than we are on defense or Medicare or Medicaid. But also, it's morally wrong. I mean, no district has a greater stake in Medicaid than mine. More than 70% of children, more than 80% of nursing home residents, more than 90% of baby deliveries in my district are covered by Medicaid. And take work requirements. Work requirements in theory are paperwork requirements in practice. Right? The evidence tells us that work requirements do not lead to greater employment. It simply causes people to lose their health care. Arkansas was the first state to implement a work requirements program. It caused 18,000 people to lose their health insurance in the first 5 months, and the vast majority of those people were eligible for Medicaid. So the point of these frequent eligibility checks or these so-called work requirements is actually to cause people to lose their health insurance.
What do you say to people that are constantly bringing up the fact that there's a rampant abuse of fraud? Is that accurate? What's your response to them?
Look, there is fraud and waste and abuse in every program, including Medicaid, but it's nowhere near the $715 billion cut that Republicans are envisioning for Medicaid. So in 2023, the improper payment rate was about 5%, $30 billion. Of the $30 billion, 80% was attributable to insufficient documentation or administrative errors. So the actual amount of fraud is small in the grand scheme of the overall program.
Look, I hear what you're saying about creating extra paperwork for, government bureaucrats to check on people if they're meeting the eligibility requirements. I hate making everything less efficient and making things more costly. So I do hear you on that. But then what do we do at the end of the day if we have massive debt? And this bill, which I've criticized, will add to the debt. I understand that. I'm not a big fan of that.
Massively.
Massive additions to the debt. But we have to cut. I don't support, massively raising taxes in order to cover our debt. We have to find something to cut. Maybe that's what Elon Musk was trying to do. I don't know how well it worked out. Where can we find some savings to help get the debt under control?
Look, instead of pursuing a hyper-partisan reconciliation bill that's going to grow the deficit by $3 trillion, and if it's made permanent, by $5 trillion, and we're on a trajectory to have interest on the debt surpass $2 trillion in the 2030s. That's going to be the result of the Republican reconciliation bill. Instead of pursuing that course, why not negotiate a bipartisan compromise that seeks to make these programs more efficient, that raises taxes on the top 1%, because we are planting the seeds of a fiscal crisis. I worry about the future of our country. If a superpower were planting the seeds of its own decline, it would paralyze the global economy with uncertainty. It would erode confidence in the dollars, the world's reserve currency. It would allow its manufacturing base to atrophy from neglect, and we would grow the deficit until it becomes the largest budget item in our federal budget. That's not a story of success. That's a story of national decline.
Now, 64 Republicans represent districts that have higher than average Medicaid rates. So what do you think is the disconnect? I don't think that Republicans are actually trying to commit political suicide by doing this bill. So what do you think?
When Trump keeps forbidding them to do any
So why do you think this is even still on the table, that we're cutting so much from?
The Republican Party is not the party of working people. It's the party of the top 1%. Keep in mind that healthcare is 20% of our economy. So 20% of our economy depends heavily on funding from Medicaid. And so what is at stake is not only the lives of the people who receive Medicaid. What is at stake is the livelihoods of people who are employed by healthcare providers dependent on Medicaid. It is often the case. In most rural and urban counties in America, the largest employer is the healthcare provider. The largest employer in the Bronx is the Montefiore Health System.
Democrats right now, they lost the 2024 election. Yep. They're suffering I would say, I think even many Democrats would admit, a kind of crisis of confidence of the American people, have lost confidence in them, particularly with all these revelations coming out about Joe Biden's own health and who knew what, when, and where. You're a rising leader of the party. What is your strategy for restoring the party's faith from the American people's standpoint?
I feel like it's simple. We should ask ourselves, what are the issues that matter most to voters, and then campaign on those issues. Mm-hmm. And it seems to be if we campaign on a platform of lower cost, lower crime rates, more secure borders, that is a vision that appeals to the vast majority of Americans.
What do you think that, piggybacking off of that, what do you think that Democrats maybe have gotten wrong or from the feedback? Because I do think it's an opportunity. They keep being articles about what can happen in the midterms and how the Democrats can take Congress back. What do you think that tactic is to get to that goal?
Well, look, I'm confident that we are well positioned to win back the House in the midterm elections. But I feel like we have to be careful. We cannot simply stand against Donald Trump. We have to stand for something. We have to put forward an affirmative agenda that inspires the American people. In the 1990s, Newt Gingrich had the contract with America. Maybe we should have our own contract with America. If Donald Trump had Project 2025, we should have Project 2029. We should be a party of ideas.
I hear you on that, but again, the amount of money we are spending on healthcare in this country, even comparing to peer nations, we spend so much more than they do for, I would say, questionably better care. Maybe it's not even better care. We have a mix of a government system and a private system. Obviously, the Democrats under Barack Obama really prioritized trying to change the healthcare system in some way. I think that whether that worked out or not is probably highly debatable and is an ideological question. But the savings have to come from somewhere, because the young people are paying into an entitlement system that they're not going to get benefits out of when they're older. And young people, they can't buy houses, they can't start families, they can't do all sorts of things because we are frankly paying for the boomer generation that set these policies this way. And I know that's a lot of voters, and you got to promise them that we're not touching your Medicare, we're not touching your benefits, we're not doing anything of that nature. But to my mind, that is going to lead us down a slippery slope of continuing to support a failing system for young people.
Look, I agree. The affordability crisis, the crippling cost of housing and healthcare and higher education is crushing the next generation of Americans. But the Republican reconciliation bill will make housing and higher education and healthcare more scarce and unaffordable to the next generation. So it will achieve the opposite of what you hope for young Americans.
And I think there's a disconnect between how many people can actually die from losing this health care. There's people who are actually on the line, their lives depend on this and don't have any other way. So what would you tell people if you were making them break down with your district having such a high enrollment, what that means for some of the Americans that are looking towards this coverage?
I have a constituent, Jose Hernandez, who had a spinal injury that left him paralyzed. And he said to me he would not be alive were it not for his home care worker, who was funded by Medicaid. His mother died from cancer. His home care worker became his only family, and it enabled him to put himself through college and become an advocate for those with disabilities. I spoke to a constituent, Phyllis Lombardi, who has a son with severe autism, and she had to spend all of her retirement funds in order to get her son the care he needed. And when he was finally eligible for Medicaid, it was a game changer. And I said, how much would it have cost you in the absence of Medicaid? She said $16,000 a month. I am not aware of a working person in this country who can afford $16,000 a month for autism care. So this is not about dollars and cents. This is about lives and livelihoods.
Representative Torres, thank you so much for joining us on Rising. We really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Next up, Marco Rubio and Tim Kaine really got into a heated altercation over the South African refugees. We'll discuss more Rising right after this. Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Senator Tim Kaine got into a heated spat during a Senate hearing yesterday.
The hearing was centered around President Trump's foreign funding request for 2026. What other topics were discussed?
Rubio and Kaine clashed over the Trump administration allowing South African refugees into the country. Let's listen.
Can you have a different standard based upon the color of somebody's skin? Would that be acceptable?
Well, I'm not the one arguing that. Apparently you are, because you don't like the fact that they're white, and that's why they're coming.
I'm just asking you to say that would be unacceptable.
Well, no,
that
I would say that the United States,
a very easy thing to say.
The United States has a right to pick and choose who they allow into the United States.
Even based on the color of somebody's skin.
No one's, you're the one that's talking about the color of their skin, not me. These are people whose farms were being burned down and they were killed because of the color of their skin.
You can't say to the American public that we should apply this statute in an even-handed way.
No, I think it should be applied in a way. No, you shouldn't be shocked. It should be applied in the national interest of the United States. Our immigration policy should be based on the national interest of the United States. Period. End of story.
Filmmaker Mike Cernovich wrote on X, Rubio's level up is the sleeper story of the Trump administration.
Meanwhile, editor of the Left Hook Substack, Wajat Ali, wrote on Blue Sky, quote, maybe Democrats shouldn't have given Marco Rubio all the votes to be Secretary of State. Just a thought.
Well, I mean, it wouldn't have mattered one way or the other. He would have been the Secretary of State. And I think this really, I got to say, shows the difference between the Democratic and the Republican approach to immigration here. Tim Kaine seems to be taking the position that, you know, anyone who is dispossessed or needy or downtrodden can come to America, and Rubio is saying, no, the Republican standpoint is we will pick and choose the people we want. We
based
do not,
on
there's
what?
no entitlement
based on
whatever criteria we formulate.
So let me tell you the criteria. The claim that farmers in South Africa are being killed is wholly misinformation, as usual, coming from the Republican Party these days. South African officials dispute the claims. South African police don't support the claims. And in March 2024, 225 people were killed on farms in South Africa, and guess what? Half of them were the black workers on the fields as opposed to the owners of the farmland that they're referring to. So that's like a 50-50 split. So it's not open to South Africans, it's open to Afrikaners, which are mostly white people in South Africa, which is crazy to just pick and choose who can come, especially on the back.
Crazy to pick and choose.
Yeah, because especially on the back of Venezuela, who are also fleeing dire situations, and just telling them that they lost temporary protected status by the Supreme Court is definitely picking and choosing, saying why these.
It is picking and choosing.
These Venezuelans can't come, but these South African people can come, when the horrors in Venezuela are much worse, according to people who actually live there and experts, than the horrors that are happening in South Africa. So why? If there's no reason besides skin color that Tim Kaine can see, what's the reason that you're picking South Africa over Venezuela?
Well, there's lots of reasons I could point to these refugees as being perfectly acceptable to come in that have nothing to do with skin color. They're affluent and low likely to participate in crime, and so they.
So are the
Venezuelan people, and they're welcome to come. Okay, but that's not. I'm probably fine with the Venezuelans coming in too. Venezuelans who are fleeing the communist dictatorship of their country, yeah, I'm fine with them coming in. But the point is, picking and choosing is the prerogative of the U.S. government when it comes to the refugee program. We do get to decide we want these people, we don't want these people, we want this person, we don't want this person.
But shouldn't Congress break down why they're choosing? Like, shouldn't we have an understanding about why Marco Rubio is selecting certain countries? And Tim Kaine can't find the reason why you're picking South Africa when this is a minor thing compared to the genocide happening around the world.
But Tim Kaine used the word entitlement. He said, right, people, what about the Uyghurs? What about I am super sympathetic to the Uyghurs. I think the mistreatment of the Uyghurs by the Chinese authoritarian state is absolutely awful. And if there's some way we can, facilitate better conditions for them, I'm all for it. But we get to pick and choose and decide how many people we can have coming from the rest of the world to this country under this program. There is no absolute right to come here. That is not the legal right. Legal rights are for U.S. citizens, for people already in the country. I think I am fine. I agree with taking a large number of refugees who are going to work here, who are fleeing communism, who share our values, who love America, who are going to work and build things and contribute. I am all for that.
I
want to bring in all the computer engineers.
Right? Rich, and we need people who are
we need people who are going to build things. We need, yes, I agree with you. Yes, we need it all. And as long as you're not involved in criminal activity, gang activity, terrorism, we got to vet you all for that. Then I'm fine with it. But that stuff has to take place. It's not just, and I actually don't care if they're suffering or not. It's not. It should not be viewed as a humanitarian effort. It should be viewed as what makes America stronger. That is the Republican view.
Well, let's say we're talking about temporary protected statuses. That's like in the case of emergency, and there's no dire emergency in South Africa is what I'm trying to explain. So the fact that Marco Rubio is just taking this opportunity to say, yes, let's open the floodgates,
it's
not a problem.
It's not the floodgates to a couple dozen people.
Yeah, it's not a problem for me, but it's a problem that at the same time they're trying to ban. No, they're trying to ban Venezuelans from coming. So that's the same time. Well, it's just like, well, these are people are more brown, and these people are majority white, and you're saying, well, I get to choose, and I don't have to explain why. That's ridiculous. When you answer to the American public, again, people are not ordained into these positions. We don't have a dictatorship. We should really discuss ideas and explain why we're doing things so that people can feel like people are treated fairly. There's been a history in the country of not treating people who are different complexions of skin fairly, as we all understand. And so that's why people are arguing this.
The government is required to treat people in the country in a racially non-discriminatory manner. I agree. But they're not. No, they're not required to treat anyone else in the world for any reason. They're just not. We are required to pick and choose.
That people leading our government.
Well, you can say basic morality, but I'm saying there's no legal requirement. We get to decide who's coming in, and it can be for whatever reasons we determine. Is that not true?
No,
that is true.
It's actually true, but doesn't make it right. It's true, but I don't like to
say you can say it's not morally right, but I am arguing. And again, if it's up to me. The Venezuelans, by and large, I'm sure I'm fine having in. I would not change for the Afghans who helped us. I would not change that policy either. This isn't about me. I am in favor, frankly, of letting more people in, certainly than the average American or the average conservative is. But we live in a country where a large majority of the voters, even many Democrats and independents, said there's too much immigration in this country. We want to slow down the flow. And so we have to pick and choose, or else the support for having immigration at all just goes way out of whack, and we're going to end up with everything costing more because we can't get anybody to build anything because we don't have enough of a labor supply. To keep this pipe flowing at all, we have to be, for it has to be politically popular, we have to do some vetting, right? I mean, that's just the cold political reality.
People just want the information behind it. I know the South African president is here meeting with Trump today and speaking with him, so hopefully we'll get some transparency in that. This all feels like, there's just a disconnect between what's actually happening in South Africa to what we're reporting is happening as a crisis when there are actual crises around the world.
People.
I know.
If it was 40 Venezuelans or 40 Afghans or 40 Somali,
it's not about the number. It's just about.
Well, it kind of is about the number.
And putting people who look one way over other people when they're not in the same kind of crisis. People in Venezuela, because I've sat down with migrants from Venezuela, are really leaving dire situations, extreme poor conditions. They don't have any other choice. To think about the journey.
These are wealthy.
We're not talking about wealthy people from South Africa that can fly here, and we're talking about people who risk their lives crossing waters, bodies of waters, and. To do all that, think about the treacherous conditions that you face to get here as a migrant that did come here illegally. Then they're doing that because they had a dire situation they were escaping from, and we are closing the door on their face and making it harder for them instead of making a way for proper immigration easier for them. We're making it harder, but opening the door to this quote-unquote crisis in South Africa that's not even a real crisis.
I'm all for making proper immigration easier. Sounds good to me. But I want wealthy people to move to America. I think that is generally a good policy.
Well, they got a $5 million offer from Trump standing, so they can move that way also for $5 million. Talking about $5 million, you might have spent it on Klarna. Are you a pay later a plan for recession food indicator? We're going to talk about this after the break. So Klarna's buy now, pay later interest-free loan model may be backfiring. The financial services company net loss more than doubled in the first quarter, totaling $99 million. The news comes as more and more of their customers are failing to repay the loans entirely.
Meanwhile, Klarna and DoorDash recently announced a partnership for consumers to pay for their food in installed payments or deferred options aligned with payday schedules. And the news has some worry that the option could be a recession indicator.
It all comes as a LendingTree survey in late April found that more Americans are financing groceries with buy now, pay later loans. A growing number of Americans are also grappling with mounting credit card balances, and economic concerns are mounting with the expected effects of President Trump's tariffs. So social media users sounded off about their worries. TV and film writer Caroline Renard writes, quote, "This isn't even a recession indicator. This is we're about to have a second Great Depression indicator."
Author Dan Baltic says Klarna was never supposed to work. It was supposed to attract investors who are betting on Klarna attracting other dumb investors. This business model has its own limitations. This is interesting. Okay, I know what Klarna is because I've seen this option appear when I go to buy something online. I've never actually used it. Is it? Are there interest? Is there interest? There's not. I read on the TV screen that it's not interest.
So the way they reel you in is like a credit card company. It's like 0% interest rates. Everyone says that. Every commercial,
okay.
every scammer on a college campus trying to get you to get a credit card. And then it's like, oh yeah, once you miss a payment, 35% interest rate. Or after 6 months, 35.99% interest rate. So these are all flexible and can change like most credit cards. Like they can just pop and change your interest rate like that. And I think my mom always told me something growing up. If you don't have the money to buy it twice, don't buy it. But unfortunately, we are we're in a situation where no one has the money because I'm going to put the crown on the head that it belongs on. President Trump has us in an economy that nobody can afford, right? And so he said he was going to change this by now. We're almost 6 months into the year. Nothing has changed. And so we are relying on figuring out how to get inflation down and afford groceries, but people can't do it. And so Klarna is there as an option to pay later, but they're not going to have the money later because guess what? Later in a month, tariffs go up. And so costs go up at Walmart. And all these different things happen. And so that's why people are using Klarna because they can't afford to live right now.
So I think that, you know what? It's up to you. I don't judge other people's finances are their business. If you want to pay for something this way, it doesn't strike me as a good idea to pay. Honestly, it doesn't strike me as a good idea for Klarna for you to pay for food with we're going to add DoorDash to it. Like, they can't repossess the burrito I already ate, so it just seems like a bad idea. But if they want to do that and you want to agree to sign up for this thing where you're going to pay for it later, some working people or poor people do need a system like that where, I need the thing now in order to get some kind of economic opportunity. Like I need to be able to, commute to a job I want to have. And so then I'll have money and I'll be able to pay for it, but I can't even do the job unless I can commute or whatever it is, or buy a new suit for the job or whatever I need to do it. I need the money now. So that's the theory of credit, basically. It's just credit card. I think that's fine. I think that will also tempt some people into making purchases they shouldn't otherwise, and it's going to put them in a bad financial situation. And I think you pay the consequences of your bad choices, and it's really not anyone else's business. So if this is a bad business model, so what? It's bad for Klarna. They lose money. It's not my problem. It's their problem.
I think it's the way that our American...
I don't think it's a recession indicator. I just think it's a business model that might not be a good idea. But
well, it's the way that our American economy is set up. We're set up to have people pay for the same thing 17 times. That's why credit cards are so successful. A lot of people have historically not had the money, and then you just pay for it 10 times, and then finally pay your credit card down, and then get a new debt, and then pay for that several times. And I'm saying several times because the interest rate makes it so that if something costs $10, by the time you pay it off in a year, it costs $20.
A lot of people feel entitled to never pay for anything, including their college education, where I'm going to borrow the money to do this and then expect to never have to pay it back.
Because he filed bankruptcy. So President Trump feels that way too. So I think
bankruptcy, you can file bankruptcy.
The rest of the country should have the luxury of what President Trump has.
Everyone should have the luxury of, filing for bankruptcy isn't really a luxury because it is not something you do lightly, and it hurts your future financial prospects, but it should be an option for people who are in ruinous debt. Certainly, but just having the government come in and wave a magic eraser pen and, oops, you screwed up, now you don't pay the consequences of your mistake, I think is generally a bad idea that will create perverse incentives for people to borrow even more money and use even more sketchy systems to purchase things that are beyond their means and think, well, I'm not actually going to have to pay for it because the government's going to come in and rescue me. That is a bad system.
People should pay back their debts, but also I think we should look at this as a sign. If people can't even afford everyday basic things like Walmart and groceries and food for the night from DoorDash, then perhaps we're in a dire situation more than we thought with the economy and this inflation. I think it's something to look at and not something to shrug off.
Well, it's not good. I think lowering prices should be a #1 priority of the Republican Party and Donald Trump. That's what they were elected to do. That does it for us today on Rising. You pay for stuff with Klarna? If you do, let us know. I'd love to hear more about it. I see the option, but I've never done it before. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss any of our content. And for those of you who like to listen while on the go, we're now available anywhere you listen to podcasts. We will see you back here tomorrow.